Okay, welcome to my reporting entitled Moral Universalism and Global Economic Justice by Thomas Pudge. Book title World Poverty and Human Rights. So, moral universalism and global economic justice problem is the social justice or the socio-economic rights. Socio-economic rights is the problem of global deficits in civil and political human rights. Socio-economic rights is a standard of living such as food security, healthcare, clothing, and housing, and so on. So, socio-economic rights demanding due process and the rule of law. So, due process is a fair treatment through the normal judicial system, especially a citizen's entitlement in that specific state. So the rule of law is a principles of governance in which all citizens, institutions, and entities, public or private, including the states, that it, it is accountable to laws and benefits equally enforced in that institution, which is the international human rights norms. So the socio-economic rights is international human rights norms. So due to socio-economic rights inequalities or social justice inequalities, poor people suffer from physically and mentally malnutrition, lack of schools, lack of benefits to politics. So politicians and government officials in a specific states pay less attention to vulnerable societies and people. Rather, they pay much attention to those groups of people or agents who are capable of something. So, socioeconomic rights is the primary center of social justice. Focuses to service delivery towards implementing various schemes of the government aimed at socio-economic justice for the vulnerable communities or families, advocacies and programs to ensure food security and right to health is afforded to all human beings who live in a specific state or society which there is political affairs happen. So this socio-economic rights is not afforded just only to the privilege of persons or groups. Rather, it must afforded for all human beings. Socio-economic rights is the center of social justice in politics or in a society. It doesn't mean that socio-economic justice for the vulnerable communities or families are only afforded for those vulnerable communities or families or people. Rather, socio-economic justice must be distributed equally, so not as to the privilege of persons or groups. Thomas raises the moral universalism or universal conceptions of social justice. So Thomas provided three logical propositions of more universal conceptions of social justice. A, that it subjects all persons to the same system of fundamental moral principles. So as we understood moral principles, that it is a moral principles from which other moral principles can be derived. For example, moral principles that don't kill, speak the truth. So here, the fundamental moral principles of Thomas is the socio-economic rights such as food security and health. Second proposition, that these principles assign the same fundamental moral benefits and burdens to all. Such moral benefits like claims of rights, liberties, powers, and immunities that person had affair in that political dynasty or political affairs, and burden, which is the duties and liabilities of a person who belong to that specific societies or politics. Third proposition is that these fundamental moral benefits and burdens are formulated in general terms so as not to privilege or disadvantage disadvantage certain persons or groups arbitrarily. So these fundamental moral benefits and burdens, like moral benefits, the claims of rights, liberties, powers, and immunities, like burdens, duties, and liabilities in a specific politics or nations, in a society of nations. So it must be expected that it must be fixed and formulated by the political institution or governmental agency in general process, by the process of the process of mm, due process and the rule of law. So social rules and state of affairs, so it based on fundamental principles that hold for all person equally. So universalism merely an approach, the general scheme that can be filled in to yield a variety of substantive moral position. So example, the moral positions viewed of universal conceptions of social justice are moral assessment of national and global economic orders. So Thomas raises the two important questions about economic justice. That first question, that what fundamental moral claims do persons have on the global economic order, and what fundamental responsibilities do these claims entails for those who impose it? So the answer is families and populations in global economic order may understood that themselves as solidaristic or fraternal communities bound together by special ties, the special ties of fellow feelings of person. So such special ties generate special moral claims and burdens. That's the answer of how do person have on the global economic order, or what moral claims in a global economic order. So second question, that what fundamental moral claims do persons have on their national economic order, and what fundamental responsibilities do these claims entails for those who imposed it? So the concerns of question number 2 is the national national economic order. So the answer for this second question, that families and opportunities of populations in national economic order may understand themselves as a solidaristic or fraternal communities bound together by special ties of fellow feelings of people in a society. That these special ties can generate moral claims and burdens. However, the two important questions about economic justice of Thomas had their two minimal requirements. First minimal is that limits of what justice allows social rules should be liable to peaceful change by any larger majority of those on whom they are imposed. That global economic order stabilize the economic order depends on the presence of substantial police forces that prevent and deter rule violation. That global economic order in contrast to democratically governed state. The second minimal is that it must that it must be afforded or avoidable life, and poverty must be avoided. Then economic order must shape or produce an economic distribution such that its participants can meet their most basic standard needs such as the healthcare and basic clothing or food security. Those are the basic standard needs of the people in a society or in a politics. Some factual background about the global economic order. So it must understood that economic order must be responsive to the three factors. The three factors formulated by Thomas is that the extent of absolute poverty, the extent of inequality, and the third one is the how poverty and inequality avoided. So Economic order must be responsive to poverty, however severe and widespread it is in a society or in a nation. To the extent of inequality, that economic order must be also responsive to inequalities which is happening in a political institution. It is a measurement of the avoidability of poverty and the privilege of opportunity. Third factors, how poverty and inequality avoided, is that economic order must also be responsive to poverty and inequality on how much problem to be avoided or solved. The extent of world poverty. So the World Bank reported that 9.2% of people of the world population live in extreme poverty on less than $1.90 per day income their family. So such consequence of extreme poverty are undernourished, lack access to safe drinking water, lack access to basic sanitation, and 854 million adults are illiterate, lack access to healthcare, not adequate shelter, no electricity, 2 out of children are stand 1 in there are underweight and 1 in 10 are wasted, and 5 to 14-year-old work for their family for wage under harsh conditions such as mining, textile, constructions, factories, prostitutions, and agricultures. And it was reported also that 1/3 of all human deaths in the whole world is due to poverty related cases or causes. So poverty cases and causes such as starvations, dehydria, pneumonia or tuberculosis, malaria, and perinatal conditions. So these poverty causes or cases could be avoided or prevented or cured chiefly through food, safe drinking water, vaccinations, and medicine if and only if socio-economic rights in global economic order was formulated and afforded to all, not to the privilege of person or groups, or it must be distributed the socio-economic rights in a global economic order equally, not to the privilege of persons or groups. And as we can see that media also are biased in this problem. They does not give attention about the extent of poverty in the world. Rather, media focuses to the retrospective in the 20th century and also to natural disaster. They only cover natural disasters or those inhumane violation of human rights. And the extent of human suffering and prematures is due to poverty causes or cases. The extent of global inequality. So it was reported that global inequality, hundreds of millions people enjoy high standard of living with plenty of spare time, travel, education, cars, domestic appliances, mobile phones, computers, stereos, and so on. So example of global inequality in society, such as some people have not learned how to read and write, don't have college degree, don't have internet connections and electricity, don't have home or houses, don't have enough food and access to healthcare and so on due to poverty line. So the question is, it is unjust to live with having too much wealth, or it is just to live of having too much wealth or living with plenty of spare time? So the answer to this question is that to address this global inequality, we must distribute the socio-economic rights that serves as a social justice in a society equally, not just to the privilege of people and groups, but rather it must be distributed in a society equally to eradicate poverty and global inequality. Since global inequality as of now is even greater in regard to property and wealth. And it is nothing new. And it continues growing and expanding, especially in this modern political sphere. Trends in world poverty and inequality. So, due to trends of poverty and global inequality, so summits and government officials of different countries, including the United Nations, conduct thorough research into the quantification causes and effects of poverty, and perhaps they disguise the progress of the poor, mark it as less impressive. But the question still remains: why such government officials or countries or such summits don't have solutions to this problem? Thus, the systems of government and economic order is not our ideal system of institutions since it fails to provide social justice. Should we abolish these kinds of system, or should we raise questions and criticism to seek answer and solution to this problem in a society which vulnerable communities, people, and children suffer from global inequality and poverty due to this unsolved and unfulfilled human rights issue? Socio-economic rights still remain unsolved and unfulfilled human rights as of today, in this century.